The Witch of Pungo, a tale of Virginia's witchcraft trials. The Shadow of Superstition. The dawn of colonial Virginia in the 17th century was marked by hope, prosperity, and hardship in equal measure. Fields of tobacco promised wealth for those who could tame the land. Yet behind the curtain of progress lay an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. This was a world where forests stretched endlessly, swamps swallowed the careless, and survival depended on both luck and divine favor. But settlers also carried across the Atlantic the heavy baggage of superstition. Tales of witches, demons, and trials in England and continental Europe arrived on the very ships that brought tools, fabrics, and books. It was easy to believe that unexplained sickness, the death of livestock, or a sudden storm could be the work of invisible forces. And if such forces were real, there had to be people servants of the devil responsible for unleashing them. Between 1626 and 1730, Virginia would hold about 24 witchcraft trials. They never reached the notoriety of Salem and Massachusetts, yet they revealed the same human fears and prejudices. Of them all, one name would echo the loudest: Grace Sherwood, remembered forever as the Witch of Pungo. 2. Grace Sherwood, daughter of the soil. Grace White was born around 1660 in Virginia, into a world of farms, marshes, and an unforgiving environment. She grew up in a society where women were expected to remain obedient and invisible, yet Grace would never quite fit this mold. She married a farmer, James Sherwood, and bore 3 sons. Unlike many women of her day, Grace loved the outdoors, working her garden and tending animals. She knew herbs, natural remedies, and midwifery. Some said she had a green thumb. Her plants thrived with uncanny vigor. But in a patriarchal society, independence was dangerous. Grace spoke her mind, carried herself with confidence, and was skilled in matters thought unusual for women. Neighbors began to whisper, why did her herbs cure illnesses when others failed? Why did her crops thrive while storms battered others' fields? Why did animals recover under her care? Soon whispers hardened into accusations. 3. The first complaints. The earliest official record against Grace Sherwood appeared in 1697, when Richard Capps accused her of bewitching his bull. The animal had died suddenly, and what better explanation than witchcraft? Other neighbors added fuel to the fire. In 1698, Elizabeth Barnes declared that Grace had entered her house at night in the form of a black cat and attacked her. Another claimed Sherwood cursed her crops. Grace did not stay silent. Boldly, she brought charges of slander against her accusers. Yet the courts were skeptical. Even when no evidence was presented, judges leaned toward the words of respectable men and women rather than the strange woman from Pungo. Year after year, the circle around Grace tightened. IVA World of Frey, why did Virginia, with its wide fields and southern temperament, still harbor such fear of witches? The answer lies in the daily struggles of the colonists. Disease could sweep through a settlement without warning. Hurricanes and floods destroyed crops. Conflicts with native peoples kept colonists in constant anxiety. In this environment, people looked for explanations in the supernatural. Religion added fuel to the fire. The Anglican Church was the official faith. But in rural corners like Pungo, a mixture of Christian teaching and folk superstition governed the minds of settlers. To be different was dangerous. To heal with herbs was suspicious. To stand proud as a woman could invite accusations of consorting with the devil, v. the trial of 1706. By 1706, Grace's reputation had become unbearable for the community. Multiple neighbors swore she cursed them, their animals, and their land. The Justicias of Princess Anne County decided to proceed with a trial by ordeal, the infamous ducking test. On the morning of July 10, 1706, the banks of the Lynnhaven River filled with spectators. Men, women, and children gathered in anticipation, some out of curiosity, others out of righteous conviction that they would see a witch exposed. Grace, now in her mid-40s, stood bound. Her thumbs were tied to her toes. According to belief, an innocent woman would sink beneath the water and drown, proving her soul pure before God. But a witch, rejected by the purifying waters, would float. It was a cruel choice, to prove innocence through death, or survive only to be condemned. From a boat in the river, officials pushed her into the dark waters. By the ordeal in the water, the river swallowed her instantly. The crowd fell silent, watching for the truth of her soul to reveal itself. For a moment, it seemed she had disappeared. Then, against expectation, her body rose to the surface. She struggled against the ropes, twisting and kicking. Somehow, she managed to free herself. Her head broke above the water, and she floated, gasping for air. The verdict, in the eyes of 17th century Virginians, was undeniable. She was guilty. Grace Sherwood, the witch of Pungo, had been revealed to 7 punishment and survival. Grace was not executed. Unlike Europa, where witches were burned or hanged, Virginia's courts leaned toward imprisonment. She was sentenced to several years in jail, likely enduring harsh conditions in Williamsburg. When she was finally released, she returned quietly to her land in Pungo. She lived there until 17, reaching the age of 88, a remarkable lifespan for her era. Yet even in freedom, her name carried a permanent brand. Children grew up hearing tales of the witch who survived the ducking, who turned into a black cat at night, whose ghost wandered the mud. 8. The legend of the witch of Pungo. In the years after her death, Grace's story grew into legend. For some, she was a true witch who had cheated justice. For others, she became a symbol of injustice, a woman punished for knowledge, independence, and resilience. Tales spread of her spirit haunting the marshes, protecting her land from trespassers, and appearing in storms over the river. The figure of a black cat became tied to her name. The title Witch of Pungo was no longer a court sentence, but a permanent part of Virginia folklore IX. The larger picture. Grace Sherwood's story is one chapter in a broader narrative. Virginia did not see mass hysteria like Salem, but the same forces of fear and superstition lived here. From 1626 to 1730, about 24 trials accused women and occasionally men of witchcraft in the colony. None were executed, yet reputations and lives were ruined. These cases reveal how fragile justice was in an age where science was poorly understood and difference was dangerous. By the mid-18th century, the Enlightenment began to wash over the colonies. Reason, skepticism, and scientific thought weakened the hold of superstition. Witchcraft trials faded into memory. But for Grace, it was too late. Ex-redemption 3 centuries later, centuries passed before Grace Sherwood's name was reconsidered. In 2006, exactly 300 years after her ordeal, Virginia's Governor Tim Kaine granted her a full pardon, declaring that she had been wrongfully convicted under the weight of prejudice and superstition. That same year, a statue of Grace was unveiled in Virginia Beach. She is not shown as a sinister sorceress, but as a strong woman carrying a basket of herbs, gazing forward with quiet dignity. The community that once condemned her now honors her as part of its history. She lessons from the Witch of Pungo. Grace Sherwood's story is more than a colonial curiosity. It is a Mia. It shows us how societies, when faced with fear and uncertainty, look for how women who stood outside tradition, too outspoken, too independent, too skilled, were labeled as threats, how superstition, unchecked, can twist into injustice. Today, we no longer tie women and throw them into rivers, but we must ask, how often do we still condemn those who do not fit in? How often do rumors, fears, and prejudice still shape verdicts before truth is known? Grace's survival, both literal and symbolic, reminds us of resilience. She lived long after her trial, refusing to be erased. In that endurance lies her final triumph. 12. Closing reflections. The Witch of Pungo remains part of Virginia's heritage, not as a dema, but as a reminder. Her name whispers across the Lynnhaven River, where she once floated, condemned but unbroken. Her memory stands in bronze in Virginia Beach, no longer bound, but honored. Grace Sherwood's story tells us that history, even when cruel, can be redeemed through remembrance. She will never again be only the witch. She is also a healer, a farmer, a mother, and above all, a woman who refused to drown. Thank you for watching.